Good morning. Have you had difficulties getting by in the current crisis? I know I have. I've had terrible trouble sourcing the items for Holy Communion. Trying to get 40 gallons of Chateau La Maison Haut-Brion 2015 and 30 cases of Pringles each week has been very tricky. Most of the supermarkets put a limit on the amount you can buy, even if, as in our case, there is a perfectly legitimate reason, the work of the Lord. However, we have managed. Of course, during lockdown, the churches have been closed for business as usual, but this hasn't reduced the amount of wine that's been needed. And our efforts are constantly hampered by troublemakers in our flock, calling the police to the vicarage and complaining of antisocial behaviour. But I forgive them. But situations such as this remind us of the teachings of the Old Testament. For example, Job. And I say Job advisedly because if the good Lord had meant his name to be pronounced Job, he would have put an E on the end of his name. Very, very simple. But Job had many children. His eldest son was also called Job. This caused some confusion in the family. So the son was known as Small Job, while the father was known as something else, I can't remember. And of course the Jobs went on to invent the apple. But I digress. Many people think incorrectly that it was Job's wife who was turned into a pillock. Sorry, who was turned into a pillock of salt for saying Sodom. No. In actual fact, that is not so. It was Lot's wife. She looked back at Sodom and was turned into a pillock of salt. So as you can see, there is an exact parallel with the problems we are having today of buying in bulk and the Job lot of the Old Testament. But by reading the scriptures properly, such problems can be overcome. Now, I'll leave you with this thought. Many years ago, in the times of the flood, there was a priest, and the priest was going about his business, looking after the poor, doing the good things priests do, when suddenly it started to rain. And it rained, and it rained, and it rained. And the priest was soon up to his knees in water. Well, he looked out one day while he was wading through this water and he saw Noah's Ark sailing past. And over the side of Noah's Ark was Noah's wife, Joan. And she leaned over the side and she shouted to the priest. She said, priest, come aboard. We have room for one more. And the priest said, don't worry, he said. Go and save somebody more worthy than myself. He said, the Lord will save me. So the ark, it sailed off into the distance. Anyway, a while later, the water had risen even further. It was up to his waist by this time. And another boat came along, and he saw the priest struggling in the water up to his waist. And a man leaned over the side and he shouted to the priest. He said, priest, he said, come aboard. We have room for one more. And the priest said, don't worry, my son. He said, go and save somebody more worthy than me. The Lord will save me. And the boat sailed off. Not long afterwards, the water had risen to such an extent, only his head was visible above the water. The only way you could tell that he was a priest was by the tonsure on his head. And another boat came along, and it saw his head sticking out the water like this. And the man on the boat shouted to him, priest, he said, come aboard. He says, we have room for one more. And the priest said, don't worry, my son. Go and save somebody more worthy than me. Said, the Lord will save me. So off it went. Ship sailed, boat sailed off. Probably about an hour later, the priest had drowned. He couldn't swim. He drowned, dead. So off he went up to heaven, as you would expect. He'd had a good life. He'd done well. So anyway, he went up to heaven, and he got to the pearly gates, and fortunately for him, St. Peter was having his lunch break, and God was standing in at the pearly gates. And he saw the priest coming up, and he said, oh, priest, he says, welcome to heaven. He says, I've been expecting you. He said, did you enjoy your time on earth? And the priest said, yeah. He said, I did, God. He said, at an early age, I decided I was going to follow your teachings. I was going to look after people worse off than myself, poor people, people in trouble. And I think it was a very fulfilling life. He said, I did have a good time on earth. He said, I've only got one small complaint. He said that when the flood came along, I called upon you 3 times and you let me drown. He said, I don't understand why. And God said, well, I sent you 3 ruddy boats along. What more did you want?